The building has 12 floors. I know because I walk them during fire drills and night checks. The elevator panel reflects that. 12 buttons. No basement access. No service levels. That's why I didn't press anything when the doors opened on a floor labeled 13. The hallway beyond the doors looked finished, lit, and recently cleaned. Same carpet pattern as the rest of the building, but darker, like it had absorbed more light. I stayed inside the elevator, waiting for the doors to close on their own. They didn't. The call button stopped responding. My radio still worked, but when I tried to describe where I was, the words didn't line up with what I was seeing. There were office doors on both sides of the hallway, all of them closed, all of them labeled with my name. Night shift in the building runs on repetition. The lights are timed. The corridors settle into a hum that never quite stops, even when everything else goes quiet. I work alone after midnight, moving through the floors in the same order every night, checking doors, stairwells, and fire panels that rarely change. It's a job built on familiarity. When something is out of place, you feel it immediately because nothing is supposed to surprise you at that hour. That's why the number bothered me more than the hallway. 13 wasn't part of the system. It wasn't skipped or hidden. It simply didn't exist. I had memorized the panel years ago without meaning to. 12 floors. Always 12. I stayed inside the elevator longer than I should have, listening to the low mechanical whine that usually meant the doors would begin closing. Nothing happened. The indicator above the doors glowed steadily, confirming I was still on 13. I pressed the door close button again, slower this time, watching for any sign of response. The button lit briefly, then went dark. I checked my radio, cycling through channels that should have carried at least background chatter from night security at nearby buildings. The connection was clear, but when I tried to say the floor number out loud, my voice stalled. The words felt misplaced, like I was assigning a label to something that didn't want one. The hallway beyond the doors remained unchanged. The lighting was even, not flickering or dim, and the air smelled faintly of cleaner, the kind used after late-night maintenance. The carpet ran unbroken in both directions, disappearing around gentle corners that suggested a layout matching the floors below. What unsettled me was how finished it looked. This wasn't an unfinished level or a forgotten construction space. There were no exposed wires, no temporary barriers, no signs warning people away. Everything suggested this floor had been in use recently, maintained with the same routine care as the rest of the building. The only thing missing was any record of its existence. I stepped forward just enough to test the boundary, keeping 1 foot inside the elevator. The floor didn't feel different beneath my shoe. No hollow sound, no give. The hallway absorbed the light from the elevator without reflecting it back, making the space beyond seem deeper than it should have been. I didn't cross the threshold fully. Something about the stillness felt conditional, as if it depended on me remaining where I was. The doors stayed open, patient and unmoving, like they were waiting for a decision rather than responding to a malfunction. I tried to call the control desk, using the wall phone inside the elevator. The line connected immediately. When I explained the situation, I focused on what could be verified. Elevator malfunction, incorrect floor indicator, doors not closing. The response was calm and procedural. I was asked to confirm the panel, to read out the available buttons. 12 floors were acknowledged. No basement, no service access. When I mentioned the number displayed above the doors, The pause on the line stretched just long enough to feel deliberate. Then I was instructed to remain where I was and wait for further guidance. While I waited, I noticed the office doors more clearly. Each one was identical to those on the legitimate floors, down to the brushed metal handles and the small frosted windows set at eye level. The name labels were printed cleanly, not taped or handwritten. Seeing my name repeated down the corridor didn't produce immediate fear. It produced confusion. There were too many of them. More offices than I had ever occupied or been assigned. The labels suggested ownership, not presence, like a record of space reserved rather than used. I didn't recognize the suite numbers listed beneath the names. The radio crackled once, then went silent again. No new instructions followed. The elevator remained still. Doors open. Lights steady. Time felt stretched, not slowed exactly, but redistributed. I checked my watch twice, certain it had stopped, but the seconds continued to pass normally. Nothing in the hallway changed. No footsteps, no movement behind the frosted glass. The floor wasn't revealing itself further. It was simply holding its shape, maintaining the illusion of an ordinary office level while refusing to acknowledge the building it belonged to. Eventually, without warning, the doors began to close. There was no chime, no verbal alert, just the quiet mechanical slide I had been waiting for. I didn't move as the hallway narrowed to a thin vertical line, the nameplates disappearing last. The elevator descended smoothly. The indicator skipped from 13 to 11 without passing 12. When the doors opened again, I was back on a floor I recognized immediately. Same lighting, same carpet tone, same ambient hum, everything aligned perfectly with memory, as if the interruption had been neatly removed. At the end of the shift, I checked the logs. The elevator showed no errors, no unauthorized stops, no record of a 13th floor. The timeline jumped cleanly from 11 to 12 and back again, exactly as it always had. I stood in the lobby longer than usual before leaving, watching the elevator doors cycle open and closed for other tenants arriving early. The panel still showed 12 buttons, nothing extra, nothing out of place, but I understood one thing clearly now. The building hadn't glitched. It had shown me something it didn't list. The next night, I told myself it wouldn't happen again. Buildings don't grow extra floors overnight, and elevators don't invent destinations without leaving a trace. I repeated that logic while going through the same routine checks I always did, scanning fire panels, testing stairwell lights, and logging doors that hadn't been opened in hours. Everything behaved as expected. The building felt stable, predictable, unchanged. When I stepped into the elevator, just after midnight, the panel still showed 12 buttons, no extra markings, no missing numbers. That normality was almost reassuring. Almost. I watched the indicator closely as the car moved upward, counting floors by feel as much as by sight, waiting for something to misalign. The elevator stopped on a legitimate floor first. The doors opened. Nothing unusual waited outside. Offices dark. Cleaning lights low. Carpet pale and familiar. The doors closed again without delay. Only then did the indicator change. The number appeared smoothly, without flicker or hesitation. 13. The elevator hadn't jumped or stalled. It had simply continued its ascent, as if this were the next expected destination. When the doors opened, the hallway was there again, lit and orderly, matching the previous night in every detail I could recall. The system wasn't improvising. It was repeating itself with precision. I stayed inside the elevator, keeping my shoulders square to the doorway. The hallway didn't feel hostile. It felt complete. The lights cast the same even glow as the floors below, and the air carried that same faint chemical note of recent cleaning. What disturbed me was how consistent it was. If this were a malfunction, I would have expected variation, flickering lights, incomplete textures, something unfinished. Instead, the floor presented itself fully formed, as if it had been waiting to be acknowledged again. The doors remained open. The system made no attempt to close them until the cycle completed on its own. I tested my radio again, more carefully this time. I described my location without assigning it a number. I talked about the elevator doors, the corridor, the lighting. The response came back delayed but clear. I was told to remain calm and wait for instructions. No one asked me to step out. No one asked me to confirm a floor. The instructions avoided specifics, as if naming the place might complicate something that was otherwise being managed. The silence between responses felt shaped, not empty, like pauses placed deliberately into the exchange. While waiting, I noticed small details I'd missed before. The office doors were not randomly numbered. They followed a logical sequence, increasing steadily down the corridor. The spacing was correct. The layout mirrored other floors exactly, down to the placement of emergency signage and fire extinguishers recessed into the walls. This wasn't an approximation. It was a duplicate. Whatever had produced this floor had access to the building's internal logic. It knew how the space was supposed to be organized, and it followed those rules without deviation. The doors closed after a full cycle, just as they had the night before. The elevator descended without pause, bypassing 12 again and settling cleanly on 11. The transition felt intentional, like a correction applied after a completed task. When I stepped out, the building returned to its usual state, the hum of distant ventilation, the subtle echo of my footsteps. Everything aligned with expectation. The contrast made it harder to dismiss what had happened. The system was capable of perfect normality. It was choosing when to diverge. I checked the logs immediately. As before, there was no record of an unauthorized stop. The elevator's path showed a clean ascent and descent with nothing between. The timestamps aligned. The system had accounted for the time without documenting the destination. That absence was more troubling than an error would have been. Errors invite correction. Omissions suggest design. The system wasn't failing to record the 13th floor. It was deliberately excluding it, as if the record were meant to reflect an approved version of events rather than what had actually occurred. The third time it happened that night, I wasn't surprised. The elevator opened onto the same hallway again, identical in layout and condition. The repetition removed any lingering doubt. This wasn't a coincidence or a one-off anomaly. The floor behaved consistently. It opened. It waited. It closed. The pattern established itself without escalation or variation, and that steadiness carried its own weight. Whatever this floor was, it wasn't trying to draw attention. It didn't need to. It relied on routine to secure its place in the system. I realized then that nothing bad had happened yet, and that was the most unsettling part. No alarms, no threats, no visible danger. The floor didn't trap me or change while I watched. It simply existed when the elevator allowed it to. That made it difficult to justify escalation. To report something, you need to describe harm or risk. This presented neither. It presented order, and order, especially when it appears quietly, is often accepted before it is questioned. By the end of the shift, I stopped thinking of the 13th floor as a mistake. It behaved too well for that. It followed the building's rules more faithfully than some of the legitimate floors did. As I left, I glanced back at the elevator panel one last time. 12 buttons, nothing more. But I understood the distinction now. The panel showed what I was allowed to choose. The elevator knew where it was allowed to go. By the third night, the 13th floor had settled into the rhythm of my shift. That realization came quietly, without a moment of shock. I found myself anticipating the stop before it happened, watching the indicator, not with dread, but with a kind of reluctant focus. The building around me behaved as it always had. Doors locked and unlocked on schedule. Lights dimmed automatically. The night crew logs showed nothing out of place. The contrast bothered me. If something was wrong, it was wrong in isolation. The rest of the building refused to acknowledge it, continuing its routines with mechanical confidence. That separation made the floor feel less like an intrusion and more like something that had been intentionally compartmentalized. I decided to document everything carefully. Times, elevator movements, door cycles. I wrote notes the way I would for a safety audit, stripping out interpretation and sticking to observable facts. The elevator traveled beyond its listed range. The indicator displayed a number not present on the panel. The doors opened and remained open for a full cycle. When I reviewed the notes later, they read like an incomplete report. Each line described something real, but together they failed to form a coherent issue. There was no failure point to highlight, no malfunction to escalate. The building had given me experiences without giving me evidence. During my rounds, I checked the stairwells more carefully than usual. Every landing was numbered correctly. Floor markings matched the building plans posted near the fire exits. There was no indication of an extra level hidden between floors or sealed off behind locked doors. The stairwell logic was intact. That mattered. Stairwells are blunt. They don't adapt or reinterpret space. They either connect floors or they don't. And here, they didn't. 12 floors, clearly defined, stacked exactly as they should be. Whatever the elevator was accessing, it wasn't part of the building's physical vertical structure as the stairwells understood it. When the elevator opened onto 13 again, I paid attention to the sound. Legitimate floors have a subtle acoustic signature. The way air moves when doors open, the way distant ventilation hums, carry. This floor sounded correct. The hallway absorbed noise the same way the others did. The space felt enclosed, complete, and maintained. If I closed my eyes, I could have believed I was on any other level. That fidelity unsettled me more than distortion would have. It meant the floor wasn't a rough approximation. It had been designed to pass unnoticed by anyone not looking for flaws. I stepped out this time. Not far, just enough that both feet crossed the threshold. The elevator doors remained open behind me, their presence a quiet reassurance. The carpet felt the same beneath my shoes. The lighting cast familiar shadows along the baseboards. Nothing reacted to my movement. The hallway didn't shift or respond. The doors remained closed. The labels with my name stayed fixed in place, clean and uniform. Standing there, I felt a strange absence of resistance. The space didn't push back or pull me in. It simply allowed me to exist within it, as if my presence were expected but not required. I checked my watch again. Time continued normally. No distortion, no skipped seconds. That normality made the situation harder to classify. If time had behaved strangely, I could have framed the floor as a localized anomaly. Instead, it obeyed the same rules as the rest of the building. When the doors finally began to close, I stepped back without hesitation. The decision felt automatic, not fearful. The elevator accepted me again without comment, descending smoothly as if nothing unusual had occurred. The transition erased the floor cleanly, leaving no trace behind. I escalated the issue formally the next morning, filing a report that avoided speculation. I focused on system behavior, not on the floor itself. Elevator range, inconsistency, indicator discrepancy, unlogged stops. The response came later that day. Polite, brief, non-committal. I was thanked for my diligence and informed that no faults had been detected. The elevator systems were operating within acceptable parameters. The report was closed without follow-up. The building had acknowledged my words while refusing their meaning. That night, the elevator behaved exactly as before. The 13th floor appeared without hesitation. The hallway waited, unchanged. The repetition carried a new weight now. This wasn't something that would escalate dramatically or reveal itself through error. It relied on consistency. The more often it happened, the harder it became to treat it as an exception. I realized then that the building didn't need to explain the floor. It only needed to continue allowing it. Over time, allowance becomes acceptance, even when understanding never follows. I began to notice how carefully contained the experience was. The floor never appeared on cameras. The security feeds skipped cleanly from 12 to nothing and back again. Motion sensors never triggered. Environmental monitors showed no deviation. Only the elevator acknowledged the floor's existence. That isolation felt intentional. The system had chosen a single controlled access point, limiting exposure while ensuring repeatability. The floor wasn't hidden because it was dangerous. It was hidden because it was sufficient for its purpose without being seen. By the end of the week, I stopped expecting the building to react. It wouldn't. The 13th floor existed within a narrow channel of operation, and everything outside that channel remained untouched. The realization settled slowly and heavily. Whatever this floor was, it didn't require belief or recognition. It required only that the elevator continue to function as designed, and as long as I kept riding it during night shift, the building had no reason to change anything at all. On the next shift, I changed my routine on purpose, not to provoke the floor, but to remove my own habits from the equation. I avoided the elevator until late, completed my rounds by stairs, and double-checked floor signage, fire plan posters, and the directory near reception. 12 floors, consistent everywhere. No hidden numbering, no missing levels, no 13 quietly skipped the way some older buildings do. That made what happened later feel sharper, not softer. When I finally stepped into the elevator after midnight, the panel still showed 12 buttons and nothing else. The system looked normal enough to lull a person into complacency, which I no longer trusted. I watched the indicator like it was a second clock. The elevator didn't hesitate. It moved upward smoothly, stopped briefly on a legitimate floor, then continued as if it had been given a destination I couldn't see. The number 13 appeared without drama. No flicker, no glitch, no warning tone. The doors opened onto the same finished hallway, lit evenly and cleaned recently, the darker carpet absorbing light in a way that made the corridor feel deeper than it should have been. The office doors lined both sides in a familiar rhythm, and the labels with my name were still there, printed cleanly as if they'd been generated by the same system that produced tenant badges. The repetition made it feel less like an accident and more like a prepared environment waiting for a person to do the obvious next thing. I stepped out fully this time and let the elevator doors close behind me, not as a test of courage, but because keeping them open had started to feel like the floor was allowing me to pretend there was still an exit. The doors shut with a soft final click. The hallway remained unchanged. Lights steady, air neutral, no sound of distant lifts or ventilation shifts beyond what you'd expect in an occupied office block at night. I walked slowly, reading labels as I passed, my name repeated at regular intervals, sometimes with slight variations in formatting, as if the system had generated them from different templates. It felt less like one office assigned to me, and more like a whole floor built to file me into it. I tried the nearest door first. The handle turned easily, which caught me off guard. Office doors in this building are usually secured after hours, even for staff. This one opened without resistance. Inside was a familiar layout: desk, chair, filing cabinet, standard corporate carpet, standard overhead lighting. Nothing looked abandoned. Nothing looked staged in a theatrical way. It looked like an office that had been used recently, then left in the middle of normal work. On the desk sat a visitor badge in a clear plastic sleeve. It had my name printed in the same font as the hallway labels. The date line was blank, as if it expected to be filled in later by someone who already knew what day this was. I checked the computer monitor on the desk without touching the keyboard. The screen was on, but it didn't display a login prompt. It displayed a scheduling interface that resembled internal building software, simple and official looking. Most of it was blank. One item was highlighted in the center of the page: 0103. No description, no meeting title, no room number, just the time, presented like a requirement rather than an appointment. I stepped back from the desk and felt a small shift in the room's quiet. Not a noise, but a change in how silence held itself, as if the space had registered that I had seen what it wanted me to see. The interface didn't invite interaction. It presented compliance as the only reasonable next step. I left the office and tried another door across the corridor. It opened the same way. Inside was a different arrangement, but the same underlying purpose. A desk with paperwork stacked neatly. A wall calendar with every date left blank. A framed evacuation plan that looked official until you realized the floor number on it was missing, as if someone had removed the one detail that would anchor the plan to reality. On a whiteboard near the desk, a single word had been written in clean block letters: return, nothing else. No arrows, no context, no signature. It didn't feel like a message from a person. It felt like a prompt from a process. I walked farther down the hallway, counting doors, trying to find one label that didn't match my name. There weren't any. The repetition became oppressive, the way identical hotel corridors can become oppressive when you've been awake too long. The floor didn't distort or shift. It didn't need to. It remained orderly. which made it harder to reject. At the far end, the corridor curved gently around a corner, and I could see it continued beyond my sight line. The lighting stayed consistent around the bend, implying the floor extended farther than the building's footprint should allow. I reached for my radio again and spoke my location carefully, avoiding numbers, avoiding anything that felt like a designation the building would refuse. My voice transmitted, but the response came back delayed, generic, and empty of specifics. The elevator call button at the end of the hall looked normal. Stainless steel plate, familiar icon, faint backlight. I pressed it once. Nothing happened. No chime, no indicator. I pressed again, holding it slightly longer, listening for the mechanical response I knew by heart. Still nothing. The button wasn't dead. The backlight remained steady. It simply didn't acknowledge input, the same way the building's systems had stopped acknowledging questions about this floor. I understood then that the elevator wasn't a tool on this level. It was a gateway that opened and closed on a schedule of its own. This floor didn't provide exits because it wasn't designed for leaving. It was designed for arrival, inspection, and acceptance. I returned to the office with the lit monitor and looked at the highlighted time again. 1:03, the same time that kept appearing in my mind since the moment I noticed the floor existed. It didn't match my shift schedule. It didn't correspond to patrol rounds or system updates I knew about. It felt like a separate clock running beneath the building's official one. I checked my watch. Time was passing normally, but the corridor outside seemed too calm, too maintained, as if it had been waiting for a person to align with that minute. The floor wasn't trying to scare me. It was trying to position me. The names on the doors weren't a threat. They were a filing system that assumed I belonged somewhere behind one of them. When the elevator finally opened again, it didn't announce itself with a chime. The doors simply slid apart at the near end of the corridor, as if they had always been open. Inside, the panel still showed 12 buttons, no 13, no evidence of where I had been. I stepped in and watched the doors close, feeling the familiar relief of being inside a machine that obeyed ordinary physics. The car descended smoothly, and when it stopped, I was back on a legitimate floor with signage that made sense. Later, in the control room logs, there was no record that I had ever left the 12th floor patrol route. My keycard history showed nothing. My radio transmissions were logged without location tags. The building had allowed me to visit a place it refused to record, and it had done so with the quiet confidence of a system that expected me to return. After that night, my shifts stopped feeling linear to me. I still arrived on time, logged in, and followed procedure, but everything felt как подготовка к чему-то, что происходило позже. The building behaved normally on the surface, yet small adjustments appeared everywhere. Cleaning crews finished earlier than usual. Automatic lighting cycles shifted by a few minutes. Even the elevator traffic during late evening seemed lighter, as if the building were clearing space in advance. Nothing pointed directly to the 13th floor. There were no alerts or notes explaining the changes. They existed quietly, woven into routine, and that made them difficult to question. The structure wasn't reacting after the fact. It was preparing, and that preparation gave the impression that whatever happened after midnight was not an exception, but an expected phase of operation. I started paying closer attention to how people spoke about the building during the short overlap hours before midnight. No one mentioned missing floors or elevator issues directly. Conversations stayed procedural, focused on tasks and handovers. Yet there was a subtle pattern I couldn't ignore. People lingered less near the lifts as the night deepened. Some chose stairs for no practical reason. Others waited longer than necessary, as if giving the building time to finish something before they moved through it. No one articulated discomfort. They didn't need to. The behavior suggested an unspoken understanding, a shared instinct that certain movements were better avoided after a certain hour, even if no policy required it. The building itself reinforced that instinct. Late-night elevator calls took slightly longer to respond, not enough to count as a fault, but enough to register. When doors opened, they stayed open longer than usual, as if waiting to confirm something before closing. I tested this deliberately one night, calling the lift from different floors and timing the response. The delays clustered around midnight, then normalized again afterward. The system wasn't broken. It was prioritizing. That prioritization aligned too closely with my own experiences to dismiss. The building was allocating attention and resources around a window of time it never acknowledged openly, shaping behavior without issuing a single instruction. When the elevator opened onto 13 again, the floor looked unchanged at first glance. Same lighting, same carpet, same closed doors bearing my name, but the atmosphere felt denser, as if the space had been tuned more precisely since my last visit. I noticed small details had shifted. The lights were adjusted to eliminate shadow entirely. The air was perfectly still, neither cool nor warm. Even the faint ambient noise I had heard before was gone. The floor felt finalized. Whatever process had been incomplete earlier had finished quietly, without requiring my presence. I wasn't here to trigger change anymore. I was here to witness a state that had already been achieved. I checked the office with the lit monitor again. The scheduling interface was still there, but the highlighted time had changed. 1:03 was gone. In its place was a sequence. Multiple entries stacked vertically, each one separated by identical spacing. The times followed a pattern I recognized immediately from building operations, the same kind used for maintenance cycles and automated system checks. The implication settled slowly. The building was no longer preparing for a single moment. It was preparing for repetition. The 13th floor wasn't a destination anymore. It was part of a recurring process that expected to run again and again without interruption. That realization reframed my role entirely. I wasn't encountering something new each night. I was stepping into a phase of operation the building had likely performed before, with or without my awareness. The names on the doors made more sense in that context. They weren't marking ownership. They were assigning responsibility. The floor wasn't personalized because it was interested in me. It was personalized because it needed someone in that position, someone whose movements, access, and authority aligned with night operations. I hadn't been singled out. I had been selected because I fit cleanly into an existing framework. I felt the urge to leave intensify, not as panic, but as resistance, the kind that builds when you realize a system is making assumptions about you that you never agreed to. I walked back toward the elevator, aware that my movement now felt expected rather than observed. The doors opened before I pressed the call button. Inside, the panel still showed 12 floors, Nothing extra, nothing out of place. The machine maintained its clean presentation, hiding the complexity of what it enabled. I stepped in, and the doors closed immediately, as if the building were satisfied that I had completed the part of the process assigned to me that night. Back on a legitimate floor, the difference felt jarring. Shadows returned. Air circulated again. The ambient hum of the building resumed. It felt louder, messier, less controlled. I checked my watch. Time had passed normally, but the sense of duration was distorted. The visit to 13 felt both brief and extensive, like something that had occurred outside the normal flow of the shift. I reviewed the logs again. As always, there was nothing. No unauthorized stops, no unexplained delays. The system had edited the night cleanly, preserving only what fit its official narrative. By the end of the shift, I stopped trying to decide whether the floor was dangerous. That question assumed the building cared about harm. Everything I'd seen suggested it cared about continuity instead. The 13th floor existed because it served a function. The elevator accessed it because that function required access. And I had been brought into it because my role aligned with that requirement. The building didn't threaten. It didn't warn. It prepared. And preparation, I realized, was far more difficult to resist than force. When I left the building that morning, I caught my reflection in the glass doors and hesitated. For a moment, I wondered whether there was a version of me still upstairs, behind one of those labeled doors, filed neatly into a system I had only partially glimpsed. The thought didn't feel dramatic. It felt administrative. As I stepped outside, the building behind me remained silent and unchanged, presenting itself as a normal office block beginning another ordinary day. But I understood now that the night shift wasn't just covering hours no one else wanted. It was a position designed to interface with parts of the building that only existed when everything else was quiet enough to make room for them. After several nights, I stopped treating the 13th floor as an interruption and started treating it as an expectation. That shift didn't come from acceptance. It came from noticing how the building began responding to me before I made decisions. Doors unlocked earlier when I approached. Elevators arrived faster on the floors I used most. My access badge registered without the slight delay it used to have, as if the system had recalibrated around my habits. These weren't malfunctions. They were optimizations. The building wasn't reacting after I moved. It was predicting how I would move and adjusting in advance, smoothing friction out of my path the way a well-run system does when it identifies a preferred flow. I tested that theory by changing my routine deliberately. I lingered longer on lower floors, skipped checks I normally performed early, and avoided the elevator entirely until well after midnight. The building compensated quietly. Lights stayed on longer where I stood. Climate control adjusted to maintain comfort, even when no one else was present. When I finally approached the elevator, it was already there, doors open, waiting. No call registered in the system logs. The car had simply positioned itself where I would need it. The building didn't correct me. It adapted to me, folding my deviations into a new baseline that still delivered the same result. The 13th floor opened again without hesitation. This time, the doors didn't wait the full cycle before closing behind me. They shut sooner, decisively, as if the system no longer needed to keep an exit available. The hallway felt unchanged in structure, but its atmosphere had shifted. It no longer felt like a space being presented for inspection. It felt like a space assuming familiarity. The lighting was adjusted subtly, eliminating glare. The silence felt intentional, calibrated rather than empty. I realized then that the floor wasn't revealing itself anymore. It was accommodating me, refining itself based on previous visits. I checked the doors again, moving faster this time, aware that hesitation might be recorded as inefficiency. Offices opened easily. Interiors looked less generic than before. Papers on desks were arranged in ways that suggested ongoing work rather than staged stillness. Screens showed interfaces similar to those used in the building's back-end systems, stripped of branding and context. Everything felt mid-process. The floor wasn't a destination, it was an operational layer, one that didn't align cleanly with the human-facing parts of the building, and I was moving through it like someone expected to understand workflows rather than occupy space. I noticed my name appeared less frequently now, not because it had been removed, but because it had been replaced. Some doors were labeled with titles instead: night operations, oversight, compliance. Those labels unsettled me more than repetition ever had. They suggested function rather than identity, roles rather than individuals. The building wasn't focused on me as a person anymore. It was integrating me into a structure that could persist without personal markers. The implication was clear. Whatever I represented could be transferred, reused, or reassigned if needed. My importance lay in alignment, not uniqueness. I tried to leave sooner than usual. The elevator doors didn't open when I approached them. The panel lit normally, but the call didn't register. After several seconds, the doors opened on their own, not because I had summoned them, but because the system had determined the timing was correct. Inside, the panel still showed 12 buttons. No indication of where the car had been waiting. I felt the first real flicker of panic then, not because I was trapped, but because my presence had stopped influencing outcomes. The building was no longer responding to me. It was incorporating me. Back on a legitimate floor, I attempted to trigger an alert manually, citing uncertainty about elevator behavior. The system acknowledged the report and closed it almost immediately, marking the condition as monitored and stable. That phrasing stayed with me. Monitored, stable. The building wasn't denying the situation. It was classifying it as resolved. The classification didn't reflect my experience, but that didn't matter. Systems don't operate on perception. They operate on thresholds, and whatever line existed between acceptable and unacceptable had already been crossed without consequence. The next time the 13th floor appeared, I didn't hesitate or resist. I stepped out, moved down the corridor, and checked doors with practiced efficiency. My actions felt rehearsed, not because I had planned them, but because the environment anticipated them. The floor responded subtly, lights adjusted as I passed, screens refreshed when I approached. It felt less like exploration and more like execution, a sequence of actions designed to be completed rather than questioned. I understood then that the building didn't need my consent. It needed my participation, and it had engineered conditions where participation felt natural. I began to feel the strain outside the building instead of inside it. Daylight felt disjointed. Sleep came unevenly. My sense of time flattened, as if the nights were exerting more influence than the days. The 13th floor didn't intrude into my thoughts constantly. It didn't need to. It occupied a fixed position, predictable and waiting. That predictability was its greatest leverage. I planned around it without meaning to, adjusting my life to accommodate something that officially did not exist. By the end of the week, I stopped asking whether I could prevent the elevator from opening on 13. That question no longer felt relevant. The better question was whether the building would still open it if I wasn't there. Given how seamlessly it had absorbed my behavior, I suspected the answer was yes. The floor didn't depend on my awareness. It depended on continuity, and continuity, once established, doesn't require supervision. It only requires that nothing interrupt it. I had become one more element the building accounted for, predictable enough to be trusted, replaceable enough to be ignored. On my last night, nothing dramatic announced itself. There was no sense of escalation, no tightening of the atmosphere, no final warning. The building beamed with the same quiet efficiency it always had, lights dimming on schedule, corridors settling into their familiar hum. That normality felt deliberate. If there was an end coming, it wasn't going to be marked. I moved through my checks automatically, aware that I no longer expected the building to surprise me. The 13th floor was no longer an anomaly waiting to be explained. It was a condition, stable and accounted for. The absence of tension felt heavier than fear ever had. It meant the process was complete. The elevator arrived before I called it. Doors open, interior lights steady, no sound beyond the soft mechanical readiness I knew too well. I stepped inside without hesitation, and the car began to rise immediately, as if the destination had already been decided. The panel still showed 12 buttons. I watched them carefully, not expecting change, but needing to confirm the illusion remained intact. The building no longer needed to show me 13 on the panel. That phase had passed. When the doors opened, the hallway was already waiting. Same lighting, same depth, same quiet certainty that this floor had kept its place whether I acknowledged it or not. I walked the corridor slowly, noticing how little effort it took now. My body moved with familiarity, my attention no longer searching for irregularities. The doors no longer needed my name printed on them. Many were labeled only with roles or system terms, stripped of any attempt at personalization. That change felt final. The floor wasn't addressing me anymore. It didn't need to. Whatever function it served had been abstracted beyond individual identity. I was interchangeable now, a role fulfilled rather than a person engaged. The space felt complete in a way that left no room for curiosity. In the office, with the scheduling interface, the screen no longer highlighted specific times. Instead, it displayed a continuous status indicator, a calm confirmation that the process was active. No instructions, no prompts, just confirmation. I didn't try to interact with it. There was nothing left to test. The system wasn't hiding answers. It had simply moved beyond the need to provide them. Standing there, I understood that the 13th floor wasn't meant to be discovered or questioned. It was meant to operate quietly, supported by routines that made its existence unremarkable to everything except the part of the building that required it. When I returned to the elevator, the doors closed immediately behind me, smooth and final. The descent felt longer than usual, though my watch showed nothing unusual. The sensation passed without incident, leaving me on a legitimate floor where signage made sense and the air felt imperfect again. The contrast was stark. Legitimate floors now felt messier, less controlled, full of variables the building tolerated but didn't prioritize. The 13th floor had been different because it was optimized. It existed where uncertainty had been minimized, where every element served a purpose the system understood completely. At the end of the shift, I filed no report. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been classified, closed, and archived without my involvement. The logs showed a clean night, no anomalies, no unauthorized access. I realized then that documentation was no longer part of the process. The building didn't need records of the 13th floor because it didn't need justification. It wasn't provisional or experimental. It had achieved the status that systems reserve for things they intend to keep. I didn't return the following night. Another guard took my shift. The handover was brief and uneventful. No warnings, no special instructions. The building didn't react to the change. That confirmed what I had already suspected. I wasn't essential. I had been convenient. The role mattered, not the person. As long as someone occupied the position, the system would adapt, just as it had adapted to me. The 13th floor didn't require witnesses. It required continuity. Weeks later, I passed the building during the day and stopped across the street without intending to. From the outside, it looked unchanged. 12 visible floors, clean glass, normal foot traffic. Nothing about it suggested an extra level hidden between numbers. That invisibility was part of its stability. What existed inside didn't need to be reflected outward. The building had learned how to separate what it showed from what it used. I understood then that the floor wasn't concealed by accident. It was concealed because nothing external needed to account for it. I thought about reporting it again, this time from a distance, but the idea felt pointless. There was no vocabulary for what I would be reporting. Systems don't respond to stories. They respond to faults, and there was no fault to identify. The 13th floor functioned as intended. The elevator accessed it when required. The building supported it without hesitation. From a procedural standpoint, everything was correct. That correctness was the most unsettling part. It meant there was no mechanism for removal, because removal implies error, and this was not an error. Now, when I think about that building, I don't imagine the hallway or the doors anymore. I imagine the schedule that never listed the floor and the elevator that never asked permission. The 13th floor remains where it always was, occupying a place the building has already made room for. It doesn't appear because someone presses a button. It appears because the system reaches the moment when it needs it. Nothing about it is unfinished. Nothing about it is unstable. The building doesn't have an extra floor. It has a floor it knows how to use. When the city sleeps, it notices who doesn't.